What started as a fun cave exploring adventure with Tim and Alex quickly turned into a nightmare at the bottom of a 50-foot cave as one of them fell over 20 feet, sustaining life-threatening injuries. Soon, Alex would have to make an impossible decision: save himself or his friend. Watch how in 14 hours, with courage as their only weapon, a team of rescuers descended into the cave openings less than 15 inches wide, facing challenges at every turn to try and reach Tim, who lies at the bottom of the cave, bloody and broken. This is the true story of the Weybridge Cave incident. Within the Vermont foothills lies the narrow Weybridge Cave. The constricted rocky opening is barely more comprehensive than a human torso. At its narrowest, just 15 inches separate opposite walls. Beyond, the tunnel opens briefly into more spacious chambers before constricting again into claustrophobic chutes. At about 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday, August 6, 2013, two 20-year-old men, Alex and Tim, entered Weybridge Cave without ropes or harnesses, hoping to pass through about 120 feet of passage, including the narrow sloped entrance side crawl. Squeezing through the narrow 15-inch opening, they figured that any safety equipment would only slow them down. As they crawled on hands and knees deeper into the rocky cave, they walked through an 18-foot cliff using uneven footholds and emerged into a more expansive cavern below. But soon the passage narrowed again, forcing them to go on their bellies through an impossibly tight gap. The darkness grew heavier, but still they continued. Then they came to a nearly vertical 40-foot shaft and climbed down. The rocks were so sharp and uneven that their clothes were completely shredded once they climbed down to the very bottom, where they discovered a vast, lightless chamber. Alex finally admitted this was too much, but Tim insisted they press further into the cave as there was still much to see. After arguing for a few minutes, Alex finally convinced Tim to turn back and get home as it was already dark out. Tim's foot suddenly slipped out from under him as they climbed up a slick flowstone slope towards the shaft's entrance. That one misplaced step quickly turned an adrenaline-filled adventure into a nightmare you wouldn't wish upon your worst enemy. He fell hard, crashing 15 feet down onto the cave floor, his leg bent at a disturbing angle underneath him. Alex cried out after him. No response came. He scrambled down desperately to where Tim lay screaming in pain, leg twisted unnaturally. As the danger of their situation sank in, the two now realized the caves had lured them into a trap. Injured and alone in complete darkness at the bottom of a 50-foot drop, the chances of both of them making it out alive seemed slim as the minutes passed. Tim screamed as Alex examined his leg. The unnatural bend confirmed Alex's greatest fear, a badly broken bone. "Tim, talk to me." Alex knelt over his friend, gripping his shoulders. Tim's face was fresh with sweat in the glow of their headlamps, and his breathing was panicked. Alex's heart raced as he knelt beside his friend. Tim's breathing came in quick gasps. Alex's hands trembled as he tried to shake Tim awake, but Tim was going in and out of consciousness. Panic surged within Alex as he realized the gravity of Tim's condition. With each passing moment, Tim slipped further into death. "My legs, I can't feel them," he finally choked out. Alex's mind raced. How could he get help trapped deep underground? Useless below the rock, his cell phone offered no hope, nor did shouting into the darkness. Escape was the only option. Alex decided their best chance at survival was to attempt the 50-foot climb without a harness or safety gear in the dead of night. He knew that with a head injury, a broken bone, and possibly a fractured spine, his staying with Tim would lead to his death. He began the journey squeezing into an impossibly narrow crevice on his hands and knees. As rocks sliced into his palms, he crawled painfully through the tight, twisting passage. As the walls pressed tighter, he struggled to calm his breathing, to keep his mind off the crushing tons of stone enveloping him. Up ahead, he could see a small ray of moonlight. Heart pounding, he edged onto the ledge, desperately seeking handholds on the rock face. Footholds crumbled underneath, underneath as he pulled himself up. After 2 hours, Alex hauled himself over the cliff. Gasping and trembling, he knew Tim's life depended on every second now. Alex scrambled through narrow gaps and up muddy slopes, chasing distant moonlight. He collapsed in tears when he emerged from the rocky mouth into the fading evening light. He staggered and ran to raise the life-saving alarm, ready to return soon with rescuers. Tim only had to hold on just a little longer. He dashed and got to where they had left their emergency satellite phones. Fingers trembling, Alex dialed 911, relaying the accident. The operator notified local emergency teams immediately, but the tragedy was not over by a long shot. The following 14 hours would be among the longest rescues in the last 5 years. When the fire chief arrived an hour later, he peered down the 15-inch wide opening. Instantly, he realized that he and his men lacked the necessary training and needed to equip themselves more adequately for this cave rescue. They desperately needed backup. As the hours stretched on, Alex paced relentlessly with so many questions on his mind. Why was it taking so long? Don't they realize Tim's life was hanging by a thread? Unknown to them at the time, Tim had now suffered an epidural bleed, a severe condition where blood accumulates between the skull and the tough outermost layer covering the brain. Essentially, it's a type of bleeding that puts pressure on the brain, potentially causing severe damage if not promptly addressed. In addition to the relentless throbbing from his head wound, he began experiencing alarming signs such as dizziness, confusion, and nausea. With each passing moment, Tim's condition deteriorated. The risk of permanent brain damage or even death loomed over him. Every second trapped in the cave's confines increased the likelihood of irreversible harm. In the cave, Tim drifted between consciousness and delirium. While awake, he futilely shouted for help, his cries absorbed by the stone. His head wound from the fall throbbed relentlessly. Time was quickly running out for Tim. After the chief realized this was beyond his department's capabilities and training, dispatch called out Middlebury Technical Rescue, New Haven Technical Rescue, Middlebury EMS, and the VT Cave Rescue Network. The emergency call sparked a swift response. The members assembled, gathering equipment from across the state. Meanwhile, sheriffs and firefighters hurried to the remote cave site with EMTs. Locating the isolated opening proved challenging, delaying the arrival of other teams on the scene as some were not from the area and needed to learn where the cave was. Peering down the narrow shaft into the 15-inch wide shaft, VT leader Steve Hazelton knew just how dire the situation was. With the victim over 40 feet deep, this would be no easy rescue. At 10 p.m., the first 2 rescuers descended into the cave. Steve Hazelton, who had also planned to take an above-ground command position, was underground with a patient and a hardwired field phone. Another was at the cave mouth, and a third was at the staging area in a cornfield. The other rescuer, Peter Grant, 76 years old and caving most of his life, was the second to arrive and tied off a dynamic rope to a dead tree at the mouth and entered to assess the patient. A couple of other cavers were below the 40-foot drop, and a high 4-cam anchor was established a few feet from the nuisance drop. The operation required slow, methodical progress through constricted passages barely wide enough to fit a body. At one tight corkscrewed section, a rescuer's tangled line had to be cut free when he became irretrievably stuck. Assuming staging command, Scott Supernaw phoned into the cave, and Dr. Rick Pingree got Steve Hazelton on the phone and instructed him on administering the painkillers and bandaging Tim's wounds. By then, his feet were completely numb, and he didn't even feel the pain from his broken leg, highly suggestive of a severe spine fracture. They strategically positioned ropes and anchors along sheer cliffs in the lightless maze. Air chisels, hand tools used to carve in stone and to break or cut metal objects apart, were shuttled in to widen and constrict the 2 pinch points. 2 seemingly impassable pinches blocked his path to safety, narrow, unforgiving sections impossible to navigate with a stretcher. The air chisel was their only way to open the cave pinches. Firefighters carried them into the 2 pinches. Each tank offered just 3 minutes of chiseling before needing replacement, meaning they needed to refill the tanks over 20 times an hour continuously. They could only increase the size of the opening by a single inch in an hour. With Tom now on a stretcher, they would need to make the 15-inch openings tunnels double the size. The first pinch yielded opening a pathway wide enough for the stretchers. By this time, additional cave rescuer resources had arrived from New York State, as much as 5 hours away. National Cave Rescue Commission (NCRC) instructors had also come to approve the cave's riggings. They now attacked the second pinch, chipping away at the rock. After about 5 more hours of drilling, the passage finally became wide enough for safe passage. A trained paramedic rappelled down to monitor his condition and administer first aid. With tunnels expanded as much as possible, the evacuation began. Each movement was painful for the patient, who was experiencing extreme tenderness around his back. Inch by inch, rescuers maneuvered Tim's stretcher up rock faces, squeezing it through the 2 pinched tunnels. After agonizing hours, they reached the last bottleneck. The modified passage was barely wider than Tim's shoulders. Holding their breath, rescuers guided him through. 14 hours after entering the cave, Tim was successfully extricated at 7:30 on 8/7/2013 in daylight after 12 hours on his back in the cave and carried up to the staging area where EMS assessed and repackaged him on a backboard. However, Tim was lucky just to lose a leg. Others were not, sadly, for they would lose something even more significant: their lives. In the story of the infamous Death Cave incident, one of the worst tragedies in Australian cave diving, where 3 innocent people faced a dire situation during which they made a series of unfortunate decisions.